Hey everybody, this is Andrew Hutchinson. I'm the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, the Arkansas site and the Rivals Network, and it is once again time for a Know the Foe Zoom chat. This week, the Razorbacks welcome old Southwest Conference foe Texas to Fayetteville for the first time since 2004. Jason Suchomel, a writer for OrangeBloods.com, our sister site that covers Texas and the Rivals Network, he was kind enough to join me to give us kind of an insider's perspective on the Longhorns. Appreciate you doing this, Jason. How are you?
I'm good, Andrew. My pleasure, man. The good news is we may be doing this annually, I guess, moving forward, right? With Texas moving to the SEC, so we won't be strangers for too long, man. So.
Exactly. Looking forward to it, of course. But before then, we got some football to play. I was wanting to kind of start off kind of more broad and get your general thoughts on kind of how the fan base down in Austin is feeling about Steve Sarkisian and getting his first season underway.
Feeling pretty good after game one. I mean, Texas fans can be finicky, so let's see what happens after game two. But, they played pretty well. Texas did in their opener against a pretty good Louisiana team that was ranked coming into that game. I think what Texas fans really appreciated about that game, it was just a pretty clean game. We've seen games under Tom Herman, certainly under Charlie Strong, where there was a lack of organization. It's kind of a running joke down here. Charlie Strong one time somehow elected to kick off on both halves, so Sark seemed to have things, especially for game one, seemed to have, there were obviously a couple penalties and things that they weren't too happy about, but all in all, I think people thought it was a really clean game. Texas played well. There were a couple of moments, and this is something Texas fans really wanted to see from Sark. There were a couple of moments where they actually audibled at the line of scrimmage. Hudson Card, the quarterback, kind of checked with Sark. They saw something, they changed the play up, just based on something they had seen, like literally the play before, and it worked wonderfully. It went for a touchdown. So Texas fans are like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen that, and it's been a decade probably. As good as Tom Herman was regarded as an offensive coordinator, it never clicked in Austin in terms of adjustments and things like that. So all in all, again, it's 1 week, but yeah, Texas fans feel pretty good. I think Sark is really well liked. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. Even before last week, the Texas fans really kind of found themselves, I think, relating to Sark. He's kind of different than Tom Herman, a little bit more laid back and I don't want to say more personable, but I don't know, just kind of easier to relate to. I think fans like watching him in the press conferences maybe a little bit more than they did Tom Herman. But all in all, off to a good start. But again, hey, I say let's see what the vibe is after game two up in Arkansas. It may be after the first quarter. If Texas is down 10-0 after the first quarter, it'll be fire Steve Sarkisian on our message board. So, we'll see. But so far, things are pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you kind of touched on some of the main takeaways from that first game. It was a 38-18 win over, as you said, a really good Louisiana team. Was there anything in that game that maybe surprised you on either side of the ball or even on special teams, anything that you weren't expecting going in that you saw happen?
If I'm being honest, Andrew, it kind of went about as I expected. I think Texas played better than I expected. I expected it to be a lower scoring game in a closer game. I did not pick Texas to win by 20. I think I had Texas winning the game 27-20. So I had a pretty low scoring, close victory. So all in all, I would go back to what I said in my first answer, just the fact that it was a clean game from top to bottom on both sides of the ball. And the other thing that I would guess was a little surprising to me was the play of Hudson Card, the freshman quarterback in his first start. I thought Hudson Card he'd do well. I thought he'd have his moments, but I thought there might be stints, maybe a full quarter where he really struggled and the offense was sluggish, but he came out, they went 3-and-out in their first series. And of course, right after everybody's like, oh my gosh, is it time to replace Hudson Card? But after that, he played really well. If I look at the stats, he threw for, it was 224, but it's pretty efficient 224 on 14 completions. QBR was like 160 something, I believe, or 180 something, I believe. I don't have that in front of me, but so all in all, it was a very efficient performance for Hudson Card in his first start. I thought he actually played better than I expected him to.
Yeah, that was going to leads right into my next question. I know there was a quarterback battle down there. Personally, I saw Casey Thompson in the bowl game, and I was thinking, oh wow, that guy's pretty good. They're going to have a guy, and lo and behold, Hudson Card beats him out. How did that battle unfold during camp, and how do you envision Texas using Thompson, moving forward? I know he played some in the Louisiana game as well. Is he just a mop-up guy at this point?
Well, to answer the second part first, no, they don't consider him a mop-up guy. He came in probably midway through the third quarter of this last game. I'd say the game was pretty much in hand, but it wasn't over by any means. I mean, Louisiana was still in that game, and Casey Thompson comes in and leads them right down for a touchdown in his drive. And then after that, it was more just handing the ball off after that. So I think ultimately, I mean, Sark says, hey, we're going to need both quarterbacks. We're going to have to play both quarterbacks at some point this year, be it Hudson Card getting injury or, with COVID, you never know what might happen. So they are planning to prepare both guys to be potential starters. Hudson Card is on top of the depth chart. He'll be the guy that takes the first series Saturday night against Arkansas. But they want to get Casey Thompson in the game in meaningful situations. They don't want it to be just kind of your tried and true mop-up duty, what you're used to seeing. So, but it was a really good battle all camp. Casey, like you said, he played in the bowl game. He came in, replaced Sam Ehlinger in the second half against Colorado, and he's throwing it all over the field and marches Texas up and down the field. Was really, really good. But we had heard even before that, hey, Hudson Card, this kid is the real deal behind the scenes. They just didn't want to play him in that bowl game, being a true freshman, so on and so forth. So it was a close battle all fall camp. Sarkisian said, hey, man, this may be the toughest quarterback decision he's ever had to make at any of his coaching stops. Okay, so it was that close. Ultimately, they went with Hudson Card. It worked out well for him in game one, but who's to say? I mean, Casey Thompson looked really good in game one, too. So it's nice for Texas knowing they have two pretty good options. It's going to be interesting with Hudson. This will be his first true road start, first really hostile environment this weekend. So we'll see how he handles that. Might they go to Casey Thompson a little earlier than they did last week? It's possible. I think how the game unfolds, obviously will play a big part in that. But behind the scenes, if you ask people inside the Texas program, they like what they have in Casey Thompson. They think Hudson Card, as he gains more experience, has true, superstar potential. They think he really is that kind of player. I mean, a high NFL draft pick if he continues to develop. He's still a freshman, so a lot of development there. But both those guys will play. They're high on both those players at the quarterback position.
That makes sense, and of course, I've got to ask you about Bijan Robinson. I mean, what does he bring to the table, and what makes him so good for Texas?
What he brings to the table, Andrew, pretty much everything. He does everything pretty well. I mean, there's really not a weakness. This is a guy, and I'll start with off the field. He is as high of a character person as you're ever going to meet for a young man his age. And I was fortunate enough to cover him as a recruit, and same thing even when he was a recruit. I mean, just an incredible person off the field, great representative for the university off the field, but on the field, good vision. He's fast. I think he's probably one of the better receiving backs I've ever covered. I've been doing this 20 years in terms of covering high school prospects. He may be one of the best receiving running backs I've ever seen. He's that good of a receiver. He runs with power. You'll see it when you look at him. His legs are like tree trunks, but people kind of thought of him more of as a finesse back coming out of high school, a guy who can work in space, a guy who's going to be involved in the passing game, but he can do that for you, but he can also run through tackles. I mean, if you try to ankle tackle or leg tackle Bijan, he's not going to go down, man. He's going to run through tackles. So he does a little bit of everything for them. He's the guy that's going to make this offense go. I mean, the quarterbacks I mentioned played well, but it all starts with Bijan Robinson, their running back, and Roschon Johnson is their backup running back. He's pretty good as well. So, everybody looks at Sark as being a kind of, a guy that's going to go up tempo and throw it all over the field, but it does start with that running back position, that ground game, in Bijan Robinson leading the way. He was the National Player of the Week by one, I forget which publication it was, named him the National Player of the Week after last week's performance. And it was funny, I came out of that game last week and I wrote this in my post-game thing. I said, Bijan was really good. He had 103 yards rushing in a touchdown. He had 73 yards receiving in a touchdown. You're almost, talking 180 yards total offense and 2 touchdowns. And I was like, kind of felt like a pretty mediocre performance, honestly. I think he's got better days ahead of him because he didn't have the huge splash play that maybe that's what I was waiting to see a little bit more of. But yeah, Bijan's a tremendous player, legitimate All-American candidate. So that'll be obviously the focal point that the Arkansas defense will want to stop first.
And to maybe switch gears a little bit and look at the Texas defense, I know Sark and Texas, they pursued Barry Odom for a little bit this offseason before they landed Pete Kwiatkowski. I believe I got that right, from Washington. What are the early reviews of the Longhorns on that side of the ball?
Pretty good. They looked pretty good last week. Louisiana was able to move the ball late. Um, I don't know that Louisiana was the best test. We'll see what they're made of this week against Arkansas. But Louisiana and Arkansas are pretty similar. They both had mobile quarterbacks, and Texas showed that they could scheme pretty well against the mobile quarterbacks. But playing in the Big 12 can kind of be a defensive coordinator's worst nightmares at times. So we'll see how this unfolds long term. But I think so far people are pretty happy just on what we've kind of heard through scrimmage reports, what they saw in week one. Kwiatkowski's a guy that he'll change things up on the fly. He'll blitz from a lot of different angles. He'll do some exotic stuff. He'll do different formations against different personnel groups or different offensive schemes. So you never know really from week to week. Are they going to run a base 3-4? Are they going to be out of a nickel? Are they going to have, who the heck knows, 2 defensive linemen and just fly around with a bunch of DBs depending on who they're playing? So he'll change things up quite a bit. There's some pretty good depth along the defensive line, excuse me. A linebacker, I would say I'd call it top heavy. DeMarvion Overshawn's really good. Luke Brockermeyer is a former walk-on who's starting for Texas at the linebacker position. And then their secondary played pretty well in that season opener. They're pretty set on the outside at cornerbacks, got a couple young parts at safety. But all in all, I think it's a defense with some talent. And people are pretty happy with what they saw from Coach Kwiatkowski's defense in week one. But again, tougher tests lie ahead. We'll see how that goes moving forward.
And you kind of touched on a couple of the guys there, but who is the one guy maybe on that side of the ball on defense that really makes that unit go? I mean, is there a guy that Texas just, you can't afford to lose him to a targeting penalty or something like that because he brings so much to the defense?
Yeah, it would probably be DeMarvion Overshawn, their linebacker. He's a converted safety, came in as a underclassman All-American safety that they've kind of spun down. They did that last year under the previous staff, and now he's a full-time linebacker. He's a guy that just flies to the football, really athletic, obviously being a former safety, very physical. Sometimes those converted DBs aren't as physical at the point of attack, but he is. He holds up pretty well against the run. They've got a really good defensive line in front of him. What we saw last week was that defensive line took on blockers, freed up the linebackers to make plays. Okay. So it wasn't, as I'm watching it, I'm kind of thinking, hey, this defensive line needs to be a little more active. You're not seeing pressures in the backfield or sacks from that defensive line. Then I look up and I'm like, man, Overshawn and Brockermeyer, the 2 linebackers, actually had, I think it was almost 50% of the team's tackles. I remember in the first half, I was like, wow, they've got literally almost half of the team's tackles. So Overshawn is kind of the straw that stirs the drink, if you will. That's the guy they'll probably build around. But there is talent. A guy like Keandre Coburn on the defensive line is talented. Tavondre Sweat. They've got talent at the cornerbacks position. But if I'm picking one, it'd probably be DeMarvion Overshawn. He's the guy you're probably going to see if there's some postseason award nominations. He's probably the name you're going to see in those types of award situations.
Yeah, and another thing I was going to get your thoughts on. I mean, to be quite honest, I was born after Arkansas left the Southwest Conference. I've been educated on the rivalry. Sam Pittman said this week that he's educating the players on the Arkansas-Texas rivalry. What's kind of the feeling down there? I mean, both among the fans and inside the football facility about this game. I mean, are people excited about this matchup?
Oh yeah. Listen, everybody was excited for game one because it's game one. We're coming out of COVID, of course, but people are going to be able to go to the stands. And as soon as that Louisiana game ended, it was on our Orange Bloods message board, a F Arkansas. So, I mean, we've got some people that still hold a grudge. And I think they've had this game circled on their calendars for a while, Arkansas and Oklahoma. So, it's an old rivalry, as with historical ties. So I would say inside the program, there's a healthy respect. Sark, it really didn't come up much in his press conference on Monday. He said, hey, it's a rivalry, obviously, he's familiar with, and the pageantry and history of college football. I'm sure it will be discussed. They know noise is going to be a factor. They know it's going to be a hostile environment. So that's something they're going to prepare for this week. But yeah, it is a game that the fans are extremely excited for. And Texas fans have a chip on their shoulder. I mean, that's not new. They do it pretty much every year. But this is a game they really want Texas to go up there and get the W, especially on Arkansas's home field. They would love nothing more to come out of that one with the victory. So should be a fun game, should be an exciting game. Like I said, first road test for Hudson Card. We'll see how he responds. You have to know Arkansas is going to be fired up, prepared to play well. have a lot of emotion. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and the last thing I got for you is I mean, you don't necessarily have to give a score prediction here, but I was wondering how you kind of see this weekend's game going. I think the spread opened around 3.5, and now it's climbed to 6.5 in favor of the Horns. What do you see happening this weekend?
Well, I didn't even know the spread, so that's news to me. But I would probably pick it about what the spread is. I think, when I watched some of the Arkansas game last week on television, of course, before the Texas game, and when I was watching the first half, I'm like, "Whoa, Rice is giving them everything they want." And then I wasn't able to watch the end of it. I saw it looks like they started to exert their will late and kind of ran away with it. Texas can throw a lot of depth at you defensively. I don't think Texas will wear down the way it looked like Rice probably did. So Arkansas, I think, is going to have to play better offensively. I think Texas will do a good job of scheming to take away the Arkansas running game, including from the quarterback. They're going to probably make him beat them with their arm. I think it's going to be a close game. I haven't truly broken down the matchups. That'll be something I do starting tonight and tomorrow. But based on what I saw from Arkansas, what I saw from Texas, of course, on Saturday, I do think Texas is probably the better team on paper. You go to these rivalry games, hey man, throw paper out the window. Some of that stuff never matters in rivalry games. But if I'm picking it right now based on what I saw last week, I don't really have a score prediction, but I think Texas probably wins it. I would have said probably 4 to 6 points. I think it'll be a close game, maybe a big play here or there, make a difference in the fourth quarter, or a special teams play. But I probably will pick Texas unless I start uncovering the matchups like, whoa, Arkansas can really exploit this, or something comes up differently. Texas does have a couple injury notes that are a bit concerning if you're a Longhorn fan. One of their more veteran offensive linemen, Junior Angilau, they haven't ruled him out, but he went down last week with a knee injury. He's kind of day to day. They had one of their better receivers had to sit out last week. He's not on the depth chart, so I don't think he'll be back. Troy O'Mary, not sure on that. And then Jared Wiley is one of their, I'd call him a co-starter at tight end. He's day to day. I don't think you'll see him this week. He's day to day as well, though. So a couple of little things there on injuries that maybe have you concerned from a Texas perspective. But ultimately, I think I'll probably wind up picking Texas in a fairly close game.
Well, I think that's all I got for you, Jason. Again, I really appreciate you coming on and give us some insight on what should be a really fun game and atmosphere inside Razorback Stadium. To everyone listening and watching, just a reminder, kickoff is at 6 o'clock Central. You can watch the game on ESPN. Until then, stay locked on HawgBeat for the latest news and updates on all things Arkansas.